The shuttle touched down on the human colony of New Eden with a gentle thud that sent Lyra's heart racing. Through the viewport, she could see the alien landscape stretching endlessly under a pale orange sky. Two suns hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the settlement's metallic structures. She pressed her webbed fingers against the cool glass, her silvery skin shimmering with nervous energy. "Princess Lyra, we have arrived," announced Captain Vex, his deep voice echoing through the cabin. The Aquari warrior stood tall in his ceremonial armor, his expression unreadable behind his translucent face shield. "Your husband awaits." The word felt like poison on her tongue. Husband. A human husband. The very thought made her stomach churn with a mixture of fear and revulsion. All her life, she had heard stories about humans, their violence, their greed, their insatiable hunger for conquest. They were the monsters that Aquari mothers used to frighten their children into obedience. "I understand, Captain," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She adjusted her ceremonial gown, its flowing fabric designed to mimic the movement of water, a cruel reminder of the oceanic world she was leaving behind. "Let us proceed with this arrangement." The marriage was political, of course. After decades of border skirmishes and trade disputes, the Aquari Council and the Human Federation had finally agreed to a peace treaty. The terms were simple, a royal marriage to seal the alliance. As the youngest daughter of the Aquari Emperor, Lyra had drawn the short straw. As she descended the shuttle ramp, the dry air hit her like a physical blow. Her gills fluttered involuntarily, trying to extract moisture that simply wasn't there. She had been fitted with a bioregulator to help her survive in the human environment, but nothing could have prepared her for the sensation of being a fish out of water, literally. A small group of humans waited at the bottom of the ramp. They were smaller than she had expected, lacking the natural armor and weaponry of her people. But she knew better than to underestimate them. These were the creatures who had fought the mighty Aquari Empire to a standstill with nothing but their technology and cunning. One figure stepped forward from the group. He was tall for a human, with broad shoulders and a confident stride. His dark hair was cut short in what she assumed was a military style, and his eyes, a startling shade of green, met hers without flinching. This had to be him. Marcus Chun, the human she was bound to marry. "Princess Lyra," he said, bowing slightly. His voice was deeper than she had expected, with a warmth that caught her off guard. "Welcome to New Eden. I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." She straightened her spine, drawing on years of royal training. "Commander Chun, the journey was adequate." She couldn't bring herself to return his pleasantries. This man was her enemy, forced upon her by politics and circumstance. If her coldness bothered him, he didn't show it. Instead, he gestured to the people behind him. "May I introduce my senior staff? They'll be helping us with the transition period." Transition period, as if she were some kind of project to be managed. She nodded stiffly as he introduced each human, their names and titles blurring together in her mind. She was too busy studying them, looking for signs of the brutality she had been taught to expect. "If you'll follow me," Marcus said after the introductions were complete, "I'll show you to your quarters. We've done our best to make them comfortable for you." They walked through the settlement, her entourage of Aquari guards trailing behind. The colonists they passed stared openly, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed suspicion. She heard whispers in their guttural language, probably wondering why their leader had agreed to marry an alien. The commander's residence was larger than the other buildings, constructed from a material that gleamed like pearl in the fading sunlight. Marcus led her through the main entrance and down a hallway to a set of double doors. "These will be your private rooms," he said, opening the doors with a palm scan. "I hope they're to your liking." Lyra stepped inside and gasped. The room had been transformed into an aquatic paradise. The walls were lined with massive water tanks, filled with bioluminescent coral and schools of colorful fish. A shallow pool dominated the center of the room, its water kept at the perfect temperature for Aquari physiology. Moisture generators hummed softly, filling the air with a fine mist. "Ow, how did you know?" she asked, momentarily forgetting her determination to remain aloof. Marcus smiled, the first genuine expression she had seen from him. "I've spent the last 3 months studying aquari culture and biology. I wanted you to feel at home here as much as possible." She turned away, uncomfortable with the kindness in his voice. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Humans were cruel, selfish creatures who cared only for their own comfort. "It is acceptable," she said, though the words felt inadequate. "I'll leave you to settle in," Marcus said. "Dinner is in 2 hours. I've arranged for aquari cuisine to be prepared, though I'm afraid our replication of your dishes might not be perfect." After he left, Lyra sank into the pool, letting the water soothe her dry skin. Her personal attendant, Naya, emerged from the shadows where she had been waiting. "The human seems different than we expected," Naya observed, her tentacle-like hair floating gracefully around her face. "It's a deception," Lyra insisted. "Humans are masters of manipulation. He's trying to lower our guard." But even as she said the words, doubt crept into her mind. The effort that had gone into preparing her quarters, the respect in his voice, the way he had bowed, it all seemed genuine. But how could it be? Everything she had learned about humans told her they were incapable of such consideration. Dinner was an awkward affair. Marcus had arranged for them to dine privately in a smaller room overlooking the settlement. The table was set with a mixture of human and aquari dishes, and she noticed he had even attempted to use aquari etiquette in the place settings. "I should explain," he said as they sat down, "that this marriage means as much to my people as it does to yours. Peace has been elusive for our species." Lyra picked at her food, a reasonable approximation of kelp salad from her homeworld. "Your people started the war," she said flatly. "Your expansion into our territory was unprovoked." Marcus sighed, setting down his utensils. "That's one perspective. From our point of view, we were settling uninhabited systems. We didn't know those nebulae were your sacred spawning grounds until it was too late." "Ignorance is not an excuse," she countered. "Your people shoot first and ask questions later. It's in your nature." "Is it?" he asked, his green eyes studying her intently. "Tell me, Princess, how many humans have you actually met before today?" The question caught her off guard. That's not relevant." "I think it is," he pressed gently. "You see, I've met dozens of aquari. I've studied your language, your customs, your history. Can you say the same about humans?" Heat rose in her cheeks, or at least the aquari equivalent. "I know enough. I know about the destruction of Coral Prime. I know about the slave camps on Tertius IV. Coral Prime was a military outpost that fired on our ships," Marcus said quietly. "And there were no slave camps on Tertius IV. Those were prisoner of war facilities, and they were shut down as soon as the Senate learned about the conditions there. The officers responsible were court-martialed." "Convenient revisions of history," Lyra shot back, but her voice lacked conviction. Something in his manner, in the sadness that crossed his features, made her wonder if perhaps there was more to these stories than she had been told. The rest of the meal passed in uncomfortable silence. Afterward, Marcus walked her back to her quarters, maintaining a respectful distance. "I know this isn't what either of us would have chosen," he said at her door. "But I want you to know that I take this marriage seriously. Not just as a political alliance, but as a commitment to you personally. I will never force anything upon you, and I will always respect your boundaries." Lyra studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why go to all this trouble for someone you don't even know?" He smiled sadly. "Because I believe in the peace we're trying to build. And because I know what it's like to be far from home, surrounded by people you've been taught to fear." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "My grandmother was a war refugee. She used to tell me stories about how the enemy soldiers who captured her turned out to be the ones who saved her life. Sometimes, Princess, people surprise you." With that, he bid her good night and walked away, leaving Lyra standing in her doorway with a storm of conflicting emotions. Everything about this human challenged her preconceptions. his thoughtfulness, his knowledge of her culture, his willingness to acknowledge his people's mistakes. None of it fit the narrative she had been fed her entire life. That night, as she floated in her pool, Lyra found herself replaying every interaction with Marcus. The way he had bowed in greeting, showing respect without subservience. The effort he had put into making her comfortable. The sadness in his eyes when he spoke of the war. "You're thinking about him," Naya observed from where she sat at the pool's edge, her bioluminescent skin casting ripples of light across the water. "I'm thinking about the situation," Lyra corrected, though she knew her friend could see through the lie. "He is not what we expected," Naya said carefully. "Perhaps the stories we heard were what? Lies," Lyra interrupted, but there was no anger in her voice, only confusion. "How can everything we believed be wrong?" "Not everything," Naya said gently, "but perhaps incomplete. War makes monsters of everyone, does it not?" The next few days fell into a pattern. Marcus would join her for breakfast, always bringing some small gift, a book about human history, a potted plant from Earth, a recording of human music. He never pressed her to spend more time with him than necessary, but he was always available when she had questions or needs. She began to notice things about the settlement that surprised her. Humans and other species worked side by side in apparent harmony. Children played in the streets without fear. When conflicts arose, they were settled through discussion rather than violence. It was nothing like the brutal human colonies she had been told about. One afternoon, she ventured out of the residence alone, wanting to see more of the settlement without Marcus's presence influencing what she observed. She wore a hooded cloak to avoid drawing attention, though her height and graceful movement still marked her as non-human. She found herself at a small market square where vendors sold goods from across the galaxy. The smell of alien spices mixed with the sound of dozens of languages being spoken. She paused at a stall selling earth fruits, curious about the strange shapes and colors. "First time trying earth food?" the vendor asked kindly. She was an elderly human woman with silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes. Lyra nodded, forgetting to disguise her voice. "Ah, yes." The woman's eyes widened slightly as she recognized the distinctive musical quality of HFY's speech, but her smile never faltered. "You must be the commander's new bride. Welcome to New Eden, dear." "Thank you," Lyra said uncertainly, bracing for hostility that never came. "Here," the woman said, selecting a round red fruit. "Try this. It's called an apple. Sweet and crisp. The commander's favorite, actually." Lyra accepted the fruit hesitantly. "He comes here every week," the woman confirmed. "Always buys enough for two now, though. Been doing that ever since he learned you were coming." She winked. "That man spent hours asking me about which fruits might be safe for HFY digestion. Never seen someone do so much research just to share a snack." As Lyra bit into the apple, finding it surprisingly pleasant, she wondered again at this human she had married. Every story she heard painted him as thoughtful, dedicated, kind. Either the entire settlement was part of an elaborate deception, or she had been wrong. The thought terrified her more than any threat could have. If humans weren't the monsters she had been taught to fear, then what else had she been wrong about? What other lies had shaped her understanding of the universe? That evening, she found Marcus in his study, surrounded by star charts and diplomatic documents. He looked tired, the weight of his responsibilities clear in the slump of his shoulders. "Busy day?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, surprise and pleasure flickering across his features. "Lyra, I didn't expect. Please come in." She entered the room, noting the HFY water sculpture on his desk, another thoughtful touch. "The fruit vendor at the market told me you've been buying apples for two." A faint blush colored his cheeks. "I was hoping we might share lunch someday. When you're ready, of course." "Why do you care so much?" she asked, the question that had been burning inside her for days. "This is just a political arrangement. You could ignore me entirely once the ceremony is complete." Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering his words. "My parents had an arranged marriage, too," he said finally. "My mother was from the Mars colonies, my father from Earth. Their families arranged it to cement a business alliance. And Lyra prompted when he paused. And they spent the first year barely speaking to each other, he continued with a rueful smile. Both too proud and too scared to make the first move. It wasn't until my mother got sick, a reaction to Earth's atmosphere, that things changed. My father spent every day by her bedside, learning everything he could about Martian physiology, bringing her foods from home, reading to her in her native dialect. What happened? Lyra found herself genuinely curious. They fell in love, Marcus said simply. Not the instant, passionate kind you see in Holos, but a deep, steady love built on mutual respect and genuine care. They were married for 40 years before my father passed. My mother said those first difficult months taught them that love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice you make every day. Lyra felt something shift inside her chest, an unfamiliar warmth. And you're choosing to care for me? I'm choosing to give us a chance, he corrected gently. We may have been forced together by politics, but that doesn't mean we can't build something real. Even if it's just friendship, even if it's just mutual respect, whatever you're comfortable with. She thought about all the small kindnesses she had witnessed, all the ways he had tried to make her feel welcome without ever making her feel trapped. The apple was good, she said finally, offering a small smile. Perhaps we could share lunch tomorrow. The joy that lit up his face was answer enough. I like that very much. As she returned to her quarters that night, Lyra realized that something fundamental had changed. The fear was still there. Fear of the unknown. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of letting go of long-held beliefs. But underneath it, something else was growing. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The human she had been forced to marry was not the monster she had expected. He was something far more dangerous. He was kind. And that kindness was beginning to crack the wall she had built around her heart. The weeks following their first shared lunch became a turning point in Lyra's life on New Eden. What started as one awkward meal evolved into a daily tradition. Marcus would arrive at her quarters each midday with a basket of food from both their worlds, and they would sit by her pool, talking about everything and nothing. Try this, Marcus said one afternoon, offering her a sandwich made with earth bread and what he claimed was synthetic tuna. I asked the kitchen to add some of your homeworld's sea herbs. Lyra took a cautious bite, her eyes widening at the familiar taste mixed with new textures. How do you know about sea herbs? Even most Aquari don't use them in everyday cooking. He grinned, looking pleased with himself. I found an old Aquari cookbook in the colony's digital archives. Pre-war publication. The translator struggled with some of the terms, but I think I got the essence right. She watched him as he ate his own sandwich, noting how he had adapted to eating near water despite admitting that the high humidity in her quarters made him uncomfortable. Another small sacrifice he made without complaint or expectation of praise. You never told me, she said suddenly, why you agreed to this marriage. You're a military commander, a leader of your people. You could have refused. Marcus set down his food, his expression growing serious. I volunteered, actually. You what? Lyra couldn't hide her shock. Why would you do that? He was quiet for a moment, staring at the rippling water. I've seen enough war, Lyra. I've lost friends, good people, in battles that should never have happened. When the peace talks began, and